Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me. Just hoping that I'm just waiting for a few more people to arrive. Would you mind perhaps letting me know, hopefully Arnold's online, if you can hear me? Okay. We're just waiting for a few more people to arrive. Okay, it sounds like you can hear me. Just waiting for a few others. Welcome everyone who's on board already. We've got about 17 people registered, and we'll get going in about a minute. Okay, so we might get going. Welcome to this presentation on behalf of MSPA. My name is Stephen DiPietro. I'm going the wrong way for starters. I wanted to talk today about pricing the small stuff and how we can avoid working for nothing. Now, as we said in the introduction, in the email that went out, there are about 12 ways that we can 12 things we need to avoid when we're pricing, but I think it's actually more like 70. Once we got going with this thing, it just grew and grew and grew. So that doesn't mean we're going to be here all day. We'll try to stick to within the 40 minutes. So what I'm going to do is flick through just quickly a little bit of an introduction as to who I am. I'm the ex-president of MSPA Asia Pacific and the ex-vice president of MSPA Global. I also founded my own mystery shopping company in 2004 called Service Integrity, whose logo you can see there. And yeah, I've also written a book about mystery shopping, which I didn't put any reference to in here, perhaps I should have. And that got released last year at the MSPA Europe conference. Now, what I want to do today is, as I said, we were going to talk about the 12 big pricing drivers. There are actually 70 plus drivers, and we're going to fly through those. And I then want to briefly spend some time talking about the big traps of quoting, especially to market research companies and other mystery shopping companies. And also we're going to talk about how to deal with cut price providers, those that don't price correctly. Basically, we're going to talk about marketing your pricing sheet, but we're going to spend 95% of our time at point one. What we've found over the years, and I've been doing this for almost 15 years, is there are so many tricks that people are ignoring when they're quoting, and it is sending them broke. We only just recently in Australia had a reasonably large mystery shopping company go broke simply because they were pricing too low. Or not just pricing low, but not pricing all the cost factors into their presentations and their quotes. So today, I think success is difficult to judge, but if there's one thing you walk away with that will make you more money, I will be extremely happy and I'll consider it a success. You are all experts, and I'm sure that you probably know 90%, maybe you know 100% of the stuff here, but maybe it's something less than that. So if there's one thing you can walk out with, even if it's just a reminder, then this has been a huge success in my eyes. Administratively, just so you know, there's a chat here. You can chat up in your icons. You'll find it there. You can chat to all of us or just chat to me. You can even raise your hand, and if you want to speak, we'll see if that works. But I do prefer written questions. And feel free to add anything if I've missed anything while I'm going through this. And finally, on the admin side, we are going to, this is being recorded, so it can be played back for those that missed it or those of you who perhaps needed to duck away. So let's start. There are really 4 different types of quotes in the quoting world, and this applies to most professional services. Certainly does apply to us. There are those quotes that come in where the client says, hey, I'm in no rush, and here's all the information we need for this quote. These are quite rare, obviously. But it's somewhere we would love to be, where the client gives us all the information we need. They say there's no rush to quote, and quote in the next couple of weeks, and that's fine. Beautiful, ideal world, not our world at all. Then there are the ones that are very detailed and also rushed. These are also almost more difficult, almost the most difficult, because you've got so much stuff to get through and you're rushing through to make sure that they haven't missed anything, that you haven't missed anything. And by being so detailed, it allows them the opportunity to come to you and say, hang on, we put that in the original proposal, you missed it, it's your fault. So there is that one as well, which sounds like it's not so bad, but it can be quite bad. Then there are the ones that are very summarized and very high level, and there's also no rush. So it's like, oh, look, we're looking for a quote for something or other, and take your time for a couple of weeks. Those ones as well, they don't help us because we don't get much information. And usually it's a sign of, the ones that aren't rushed are a sign of the program perhaps not taking off as it should. Perhaps they're not actually ever going to get into field. I'm always a little bit cautious of the ones that are no rush. Finally, those that are summarized and rushed. So these with very, very little information and also rushed. Now, this is the world of other mystery shopping companies around the world who ask for quotes for their global programs. It's the world of market research companies, and it's the world of some of our clients that approach us. Super dangerous, red light, be careful of them. We're not going to go into all of those. We're going to pick out the problems with each of those and how to tackle them. So, just had my lunch. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon here, so just gulping some water. We know the big drivers in mystery shopping. How many shops do you have? Obvious. How frequently are you going to do them? Also, obviously, we're going to come back to these. How many questions do you have? It's kind of relevant. And how many open-ended questions do you have because of this issue of shoppers having to write a whole lot of information in? But sometimes you don't even get this information. These are real-life quotes that I've had on the website. I've got 10 restaurants. Could you please provide me a quote for mystery shopping? You've probably seen these yourselves. I've also seen this one. I'm interested in mystery shopping my shoe stores. How much will this cost? I mean, they just drive me crazy when I see them. I'm sure you get them yourself, and they're super, super dangerous. What I do know is that some companies will respond to something as brief as that. And if they do, there's nothing we can do about it, and we can only just hope that we can get around that problem, and I'll talk to you about how to get around that later. But responding to these is obviously fraught with danger. So let's start with the sites and the site listing. Now, again, you know probably 95 or 100% of these, but we need to be reminded, and I think we all need checklists to make sure we get this done, priced correctly. Because the site listings, if you have to create them yourself, you know how much trouble that is, and you also know that if there's a problem with the site listing, the client will come back to you because it's then your fault. One of the things that we will not do, and I don't think any of us should do, is respond yes to this statement that the client says. Hey, you can get our sites from our website. We'll never do that, and I don't think anyone should do that. 2 reasons. Number 1 is that the websites are often incorrect, and number 2, it just takes you so much time to get that information out, and you can miss them quite easily. Beware of Word documents. Like you, we receive a lot of site listings still in Word, which I find amazing. I don't know how these companies can run. Get a copy before you start of their site listing. Does it have individual columns? Does it have merged cells? Does it have regional managers? Does it have logins that they require? Does it have trading days and trading hours? Try to get a copy of that first. If you see the site listing, you can get a very good idea of what's in front of you when you're quoting. This all comes down to setup fees. Now, I know some of you are going to say, oh, we can't charge a setup fee because our competitors don't. But what I'm going to say to you about a lot of these things is you can decide to charge or not charge for them. It's up to you. Be aware, that's all. If you decide this is going to cost us $500 in labor and we're going to absorb that, that's fine. It's a conscious decision, but don't be invisible to it, because my staff get super annoyed when they know we haven't charged for this and they're doing all this work for nothing and we didn't predict it. So If you're going to get these in bad condition, we do charge for them. Not too much, but we do charge for them. And it can be up to like $1,000 US or $1,500 US, depending on the condition. But there is a lot of work here. Also with the sites, the number and frequency are quite obvious. They're obvious questions to ask about, but also covert versus overt. Which ones are we actually really going to be hidden mystery shoppers, or are we going to reveal ourselves in an audit? It sounds obvious, but sometimes these get snuck in at the end and they say, oh, no, we want the shoppers to reveal themselves and take 15 photos or 20 photos. And you didn't quote for that. And as we all know, shoppers don't like to go in there and announce themselves because it makes it a different experience altogether for them. Is parking required? I know you know this, but we forget to ask the question. Is there restricted access? We've got some that are restricted, yes, behind airports, but also in some government buildings where shoppers have to get x-rayed or shoppers have to get their bags x-rayed, themselves metal detectors. They have to sign in. They have to sign a visitor's register. They get lost. They need to go to reception to ask for special entry to the government office canteen or something like that. Don't underestimate the cost of these restricted access shops. Number one, they're difficult to manage. And number two, the shoppers hate them, which means price. Analyze the number of shoppers near each store. I can't believe that this is not so obvious, but it's just not obvious for a lot of companies. And I know that because they'll just quote based on a shop number. If you've got remote sites like we do in Australia, this is a huge, huge deal where the next town might be 300 kilometers away and you might have 3 shoppers to choose from. So the number of shoppers near each store is important. Remote sites, as I've just spoken about, also critically important. Now, the frequency of shops. Is this a set period of shopping or do they just want to shop whenever? These whenever shops, look, do a round and then we'll see how it works out and then we'll decide if we do it again. There's a huge danger sign here that's going to be once off. You quote them as a quarterly rounds or monthly rounds. They do one round and then they just say, oh, sorry, we've just lost our budget. And they've just done that to get the cheaper price out of you. We'll talk about how to get around that problem as well. But if we get set periods, with purchase orders possibly, maybe a contract, maybe not, they don't really mean anything and companies hate doing them. But try to nail down the frequency early. Do all sites have the same frequency? This happens again and again where the client says, oh, but these 5 stores we want shopped extra, or these 10 regional stores, let's not do them as frequently. It throws your scheduling into chaos and it's just work, work, work. Also, the one that people love is these wild cards for poor performers. So, hey, can you get my bottom 10% of stores and shop them again an extra time? We've got one client that says, keep shopping the stores until they get at least 80%. That sounds awesome because you get more shops, but the problem with it is that, it throws your scheduling out. You're creating whole rounds or whole shops, depending on what system you're using, for maybe 1 or 2 or 3 shops. Administratively, they're hugely expensive, and usually we charge them at the same price as the normal shops, and they shouldn't be because they're almost little one-off programs. So be very careful if they want to do that and ask the question. Monthly is not also cheaper as well. I've found mystery shopping companies have thought that, okay, monthly is better, therefore we can quote less. But if you've got a car servicing quote, for example, let's say a brand like Renault, the French car manufacturer, and they want to mystery shop, say, in our case, Fiji. Now, and they want to do car servicing. Hey, get someone with a Renault, less than 10 years old, to get their car serviced. We'll pay for the service, blah, blah, blah. Sounds good, but if they want to do that monthly, it gets so much more difficult to find enough shoppers. The problem with monthly for some, and only some, for some quotes, is that it's going to be more expensive than, say, 6 monthly on a per shop basis. Yes, you get more shops, so it should be cheaper, but it makes it so much more difficult to actually get the shops done. So I'd be very careful. Don't assume that monthly is always better. This is also a problem where there are shops with a lot of lead time. For example, having to make a booking to see a bank or someone like that. Monthly can be a real problem, and especially with rural stores. just in small towns where it kills your rotations, it also could be an issue. So monthly, we all love it, and I know why, but don't assume it's better. With the restrictions, age, sex, weight, dress size, particularities like flat foot, education levels, car type, hugely important. And again, you've got to get to the bottom of these. These things sneak in. From experience, things like flat foot. A shoe retailer, we did the whole quote, and right at the end they say, oh, but the shoppers have to have flat feet. And they can't have these certain things going on with their feet. So they started to restrict the database. They'll also like to come in with things like, oh, look, actually, can we have most of our shoppers being women or being a certain dress type? And they'll sneak these in later, and they just kill you in terms of your pricing. The car type is an obvious one back up there. Shopper must arrive at the car dealership with a car less than 5 years old and a certain level of car that's going to be consistent with our brand. Those sorts of things, obviously, they all restrict your database, which means more shopper payments. What's happening more and more these days, the clients are loving shopper quizzes. We'd like the shopper quizzed before they start, or they'd like the shopper accredited before they start. Give them a whole lot of guidelines, test them, and then accredit them. There's also whitelisting, where they'll say, we want to see the shoppers' names and their email addresses or whatever, and we'll approve those shoppers. We want to see the shopper demographics, and then we'll approve the shoppers. Or they want one-on-one training with the shoppers. We don't do that, but then we might have to do some online training. All of them restrict your available shoppers, especially this whitelisting and accreditation. If you've only got one person whitelisted or accredited to shop this brand in a small town, and that person just can't do the shop, then you're left with no one. You can't go to your shopper base quickly to get the shop done, especially when you're in a hurry towards the end of the month or something like that. So be very, very careful of these restrictions. Another one that comes up often is, can you shop? I want you to shop only this. I want you to shop the salespeople in the stores. We will tell you who the salespeople are. We will tell you what rosters they're on, so that you can be sure that when the mystery shopper goes into the store, they'll see a salesperson. That's a nightmare, mainly because people don't work to their rosters, so the shopper can turn up and there's no one there, but also because even if the staff member is there, they could be tied up serving someone else. So although they're in the store, they can't serve someone. Classic example is, again, banks or car dealerships. So shopping in an individual name is a nightmare, and we almost avoid them altogether. Or shopping a title, to say they must be shopped by a loan officer. Again, all the loan officers could be tied up. So that becomes a huge issue when you're quoting. Or, please shop Peter in location 7. As I mentioned before, almost undoable. Also the shop window, the day of the week, restricted hours, and the field time in the month. How long do we have in field? The field time in the month, I find that they'll say a month, but then a month really means, well, we need everything in 3 weeks because we need 1 week to get everything ready for our end of month reports. So be very, very explicit to say the field time will be 1 month, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it is, but be very explicit so that they can't come back later and say, we want it shorter. And it's the same with restricted hours. Be explicit. These are the hours we will be shopping, because they also like to come back and say, oh, look, can we only shop between 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 in the afternoon? Or please don't shop Sundays and don't shop Fridays at this certain time. You know that story. You must put this stuff up front. Rotations are an obvious one. The longer the rotation, the more difficult it is to find the shoppers. Sometimes the clients try to tell you what they think the rotation should be, but that's up to you. With supermarkets, it can be monthly. It doesn't have to be once every 8 months or 6 months. Do the monthly. Tell them the rotation is going to be 6 monthly. But something like, again, a car dealership, you can't do monthly. You need to do perhaps even yearly. So again, be explicit about the rotations. If you can shorten them and tell them what you're doing, you can save yourself some money, because then you're looking for less shoppers. The questionnaires and guidelines. Again, these get out of hand. How long is the questionnaire? How many open-ended questions are there? The open-ended questions, the free text, are obviously, it's important because it gives the shopper, well, let's start with the length. The length is not just an issue of how long the shopper has to spend on it. It's an issue of how long the quality control needs to spend quality controlling. It's also, the longer the questionnaire, the more opportunity for the shopper to actually get something wrong, accidentally or whatever. So they create a lot of problems, and it also gives the stores more ammunition to come back with queries. So long questionnaires, obviously a problem, and it's not just for that obvious reason of more time. Open-ended questions like text, again, the more text, the more QC and the more issues you're going to have. So less is always more. The length of the guidelines is important. The clients try to clog them up with unnecessary junk, especially the banks. They try to put everything in bank speak. You have to write the guidelines, and they can't be too long. If they're too long, the shoppers just won't read them, and then you're going to have QC issues. So if they insist on writing the guidelines, there needs to be some sort of price discussion about it, or highlight to them what that does to the program. Repetition, we're also seeing, what we're seeing, just to go back to the other 2 points, a lot of mystery shop, not a lot, there are mystery shopping companies who are winning business by saying, hey, we'll give you a 50 question or a 70 or a 100 question questionnaire so you can capture more information, so you actually get more value for your buck, or for the dollar spent. It's an interesting sales ploy, but the problem is that those long questionnaires just become worthless and also very, very expensive to manage. So that means that you're competing against people with long questionnaires, and you need to be clear to the client to say, this quote is for, say, 30 questions or 45 questions, and this is the reason why. Be careful of repetition also in the questions. I've seen too many, especially with the international mystery shopping programs, where the questions sound so very similar. There's a subtle difference for the client. They understand the subtle difference, but the shopper won't. And the repetition of questions just annoys them no end. Obviously, photos, audio, video, if there's any requirement for those, the cost must go up. Quote with photos, quote without photos. And watch out for trip hazards for shoppers. Experienced shoppers, and they're better ones, they can find these hazards. You know, questionnaires that are very unclear in their questioning, that they might have repetition. The shoppers know this, and they know that it can be an issue later down the track. It might mean they get more QC calls. It might mean that the shop is rejected for some technicality, and they will stay away from them. So the experienced shoppers are actually the ones who understand the hazards, and they'll stay away from them, and then you end up with your other ones. So you're less experienced shoppers. So be very careful of these hazards. These are photos from my house. Picked these roses last week, and it reminded me of a really important point about mystery shopping. I didn't plant them, my wife did. Does the shopper, and I'll make that relevant in a minute, does the shopper have to find the site? Another favorite of people is to say, oh, let the shopper can find a site near their home. It doesn't really matter. Well, it does matter, because we don't know if two shoppers are going to pick the same shop in the same suburb. We don't know if they went to the right one or not the right one. We don't know if they put the address in incorrectly. We just don't know anything about it. So we do not do that. Pre-booking a call, obviously it's more work for the shopper, so be careful of pre-booked calls. Now look, as we're going through this, you can see there's a checklist developing. I'd encourage you all to develop some sort of a checklist when you're pricing these things, and walk through it with your clients and say, hey, are you doing this? Are you doing that? Are you doing the other? Because it shows your expertise, and that's how you beat these people who have got these stupidly low prices, or come back when they shouldn't, with a very brief. So is there any pre-booking call? Obviously popular with car dealerships or banks. We try to encourage them to have a pre-booking call, so the shopper doesn't go there and waste their time. But is the pre-booked call also going to be included in the questionnaire? That would add cost. Is there a restricted or forced purchase? This one sneaks up as well. We've got a pharmacy client who every month they come up with a new scenario, and they're horrible. It can be anything from a rash cream. It can be some you can just imagine to say, I've got warts or worse things. And to the pharmacy brand, these things are just normal discussion topics or just normally part of their language. But for the shoppers, it's quite uncomfortable. These things snuck up on us after they started the program. And they force the customer, the shopper, to purchase that product in some cases. When there's a forced purchase, the problem is the shopper doesn't get any value out of it, so we have to pay the shopper on top of the reimbursement because the reimbursement is useless. And the quality of that reimbursement is hugely important. So you've got to ask the question, what are they buying if it's a reimbursement? And what are they asking about? Same with banking. Shoppers don't want to go in there and ask for a loan extension because they've gone broke or they're getting divorced or what happens if. The uncomfortableness becomes a pricing issue. Is there any follow-up or activity? A follow-up phone call, is a shopper going to wait for a follow-up phone call from the sales associate? We're doing them now, and most times we've got a client, we're just reporting, I'm doing a presentation this afternoon, only 13% of their clients get a follow-up phone call. So that means 70, my math, there you go. 87% of shoppers and customers will not get a follow-up phone call, but the shoppers are going to be waiting for them. So that ties the shopper up. And that means if the shopper's going to do another round, they know that they've got this lead time leading off the back of this questionnaire, and it becomes super inconvenient for them. So they don't like it, and it means there's a price issue there. The more we pay the shopper, the more we've got to charge the client. Now, follow-up activities, that's where the rose comes in. By the way, that stem was twice as long as that. I had to cut it in half or it wouldn't stand up, which was pretty cool. But we've got a client which is a bunch of florists, and they want to measure how long the flowers that were purchased took to die. So how long until they started to wilt. So the shopper buys the flowers and then they sit at their home, which is nice, and they've got to wait for signs of them wilting or aging or going brown or whatever. And this can drag on the mystery shop for 5 or 10 days. So again, that's got a price component to it. Sounds awesome that they're buying flowers, but not many people want to buy flowers. They'd rather buy takeaway food or do restaurants or something. So although again, the reimbursement sounds awesome, in practice, it's not. And having to wait 5 to 10 days for something to happen, whether it's a phone call or for some flowers to die, hugely impacts on your pricing. Where it comes up in the pricing is not necessarily, the shoppers might do these the first time and think, oh, that's cool, I'll do those, florists. And then once they do it once, they realize how much work is involved and they have to wait, they have to save the questionnaire, they have to go back to it later, they can't remember anything about it. And then they think, I'm not going to do that next month or next quarter or next whatever. So you lose the shoppers, and then you start to restrict your shopper database, which means that the future rounds will be more expensive. So these cost issues might not come up in the first round, but they certainly come up after a couple of rounds. Is it a large ticket item? So is it something that's worth, a few years ago, we did luxury boats. The cheapest boat was 250,000 US. The shoppers hate doing those because they feel uncomfortable. Is it a luxury car? Is it a house? These large ticket items are uncomfortable also because the shopper needs to conduct themselves in a certain way and because the sales process will be longer. So be careful of those. So we ask the client, how much is the reimbursement? If there's a reimbursement, how much is it? How much is the thing they're going to buy actually worth? And how long will a visit take? We know about that one, it's pretty obvious. Is there a home visit? Shoppers also hate these. We recently quoted some takeaway food mystery shops where we quoted for the home visit more expensive than the pickup. So for the shopper to go and pick them up. The reason is shoppers hate completing a questionnaire, having someone, after someone visited their house and they've made personal contact in their own house, and then they may have to send in a bad report. They just dislike them for so many reasons. Sometimes home visits are cheaper, but quite often they create a real cost pressure point. So be careful of those, and be careful if one round is home visit and then the next round is takeout. because that changes your pricing. Changes to scenarios, are the changes every round, and do the scenario changes also mean guideline changes? The problem with changes of scenarios every round is that the shoppers who did them last round will then go and do next round and assume that the next round was the same as the first one, but it changed. And then they submit their results and they're wrong. Also, we've obviously got administrative work to change the scenarios. Now, I know on the systems, the SASSIs and the shop metrics and the whatever else, it's not that much work, but it can be. And it can also change the questionnaire because the new scenario might not fit the existing questionnaire. So ask about how often they're going to change. Okay, the reporting. So with the reporting, we're starting to head towards the end. I think we promised you 40 minutes. With the reporting, again, it's a hidden one because we know that, the major software providers have got their own reporting systems, but often there are hidden costs. So firstly, does the client want personal presentations with insights and things like that? We all love doing this because we all like to see the end result of our work and proudly present it to the client. But it takes, I'm doing one this afternoon, and it's probably taken one whole day to prepare for the presentation. You think about it, you get the results, certain things are not yet available, you know the story. Then someone checks it for you. It's a day's work. So you have to price that. I don't price that as highly as I should, but we should price that. Don't do it for free. Reporting, no consulting company is ever going to go and present to a client for free. And I think we've got to lift ourselves there, starting with me. Is reporting going down to store manager level? If the store managers are also receiving the reports, sounds free. Hey, the system does that for us. There's no cost. Well, there is. The cost is in production of the site file again, and it's in the maintenance of the store listing. Because although the client, even if they give you a perfectly presented Excel spreadsheet 1 month and says, here's, we've worked on it, we've got everything you need, here it is. 3 months later, it changes, and they'll make the changes by sending you an email and saying, oh, this regional manager now has these 5 stores, not those 7 stores, and this store manager's now resigned, this new one's come in, and here's their email address, and blah, blah, blah. It's a huge administrative nightmare. You know this. You probably don't price this in, and nor do we. Again, it's a discussion to have with the client. And with that discussion, they'll understand that you know what you're talking about. Are there customizations to the reporting? That's a pretty obvious one. When are they being released to the stores? The longer the release cycle, the harder it is for you to answer the queries. It's one thing to answer the queries from a shopper, to call a shopper 2 days after the shop was done and say, hey, do you remember if there was a certain poster on the wall, or did the staff member do this, that, or the other? It's a completely different thing for you to have that discussion at the end of a quarter, 3 or 4 months after the mystery shop took place. It's an impossibility. So be very careful of the release time of the shops. It does make the the follow-up process a lot longer. Now, with international work and working for other mystery shopping providers, these sound really awesome because you don't have to do the marketing for them, but they're also hidden with real dangers. Usually these are the most rushed. Sometimes it's as little as 24 hours. Here's our brief. Can you please give us a price in 24 hours? Giving you absolutely no time to ask any questions. Zero. What we do is we price above the price we think is appropriate, and we price a little bit more, and we do that to cover ourselves, because 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, there's going to be some additional restriction that we've just spoken about, something that we've just spoken about in the last 10 slides will come up, and it's going to cost you a lot. So you need to be brave enough to do that because of the rush factor. What system is it on? Is it on a different system to yours? Is it on Excel? Is it on their own proprietary system? Ask the question how they want their data back. We think that we forget to ask this question, because if, for example, if it's on SASSI or Shopmetrics and they do collaborations, then yes, you can have it collaborated, makes it somewhat easier. But what if it's on something else? And then they start saying, we'll send you links, login links for our system so you can then get the shopper to input directly to our system. Sounds great, but then you have to get these individual login links to the shoppers, which might be a manual process. So all of a sudden, you've got people in head office getting involved in this process that is usually automatic. So the system itself is really important. Administration burdens, this happens so much. After you start, they'll say, hey, now we want weekly status reports. And you say, what do you mean? They say, well, we want an Excel spreadsheet that's going to tell us everything about what you're up to. What, are you on track? Are you not on track? And we want to have a meeting every week. They also might want to have staff training for your staff. They say, we want us to train your staff. The client insists that we train your staff on a face-to-face meeting, blah, blah, blah. And the endless conference calls about things. So with these international ones, you do have this added administration that just sits above everything. It's like the old days of having a boss who keeps telling you what to do. That costs you time. And usually you need someone doing the work involved and a supervisor or yourself involved in that as well. It's usually two people and it just takes time. The other thing is that they're really, really late at night, or depending on time zones, they're usually inconvenient because it might be that 10 countries have to be lined up together for a conference call and you just have to make it, and it's bad luck. Being in Australia, I get them at 1 a.m. Also scope creep, these are probably the masters of scope creep when you do work for international mystery shopping programs. They don't do it intentionally, it comes from their clients, but a lot of these international companies just don't manage the scope creep properly, or they didn't price it properly to begin with. They didn't price all the things we spoke about initially. And the one that's left carrying the burden is you. The mystery shopping company in the middle does not have that burden because they just give you the pressure and you've got the fixed price. So you get stuck with that. So all of a sudden, hey, the client doesn't want you shopping weekends anymore. It's like, what do you mean? Well, they don't want that anymore. Oh, we need to increase the price then. No, you can't do that now. It's too late. It was a locked-in contract and you're stuck. Late night calls, I mentioned it before, but I mean, if I do a 1 a.m. conference call and it's for an hour, I'm destroyed for the next day. There's a price to that. Include caveats or conditions in the pricing. So even if the price quote is provided by a single number, often they'll say to you, look, here's an Excel spreadsheet, just provide the number in euros or in US dollars. All we want is the number. If you just provide the number, you don't have any way to get out of this. You can provide the number with a follow-up email to say, this number has been provided on the basis that we can shop any day of the week, on the basis that there'll be no more than one status update during the month, that there'll be only one training session. You can put all of these things in your email so that if something does happen down the track, you can at least have the conversation. I'm not saying you'll win, but at least you can have the conversation. With agencies like market research agencies, just a couple of slides to go, they can't these agencies are horrible at communicating issues with their clients. And as a result, no one can communicate the issues. So if you've got a problem with the program, you're going to be talking to a market research company or even just a market branding company or a consultant. It could be anything or anyone. And you can't depend on them to go to their client with the technical aspects of the mystery shopping program and what the problems are. And they won't let you go to the client directly. So you end up getting stuck with bad programs that you really have a great deal of difficulty fixing. We usually charge the agencies more. Usually the agencies have got more scope with pricing and we charge them more, but not just because of that, because we know it's so hard to manage them. They are probably the worst clients. And it's not their fault, it's that they're not experts in mystery shopping and you can't depend on them to go to the client and communicate the issues properly. So price with exceptions. Again, we have priced on the basis that restrictions, reporting, follow-up meetings, etc., etc., etc. Also prepare a short pack for them that they can include with their client as to how you got your pricing and the assumptions. That then gives them something to go back to the client with if you do need to increase your price. As an example, we've just done some shops for actually in a market research company in the fast food sector. And after we got going, we found out that, well, for the hotel stays, you have to book the hotel, but you cancel it and the shopper won't get their money back for 6 weeks. Shoppers hate that. And you know, they've got to spend like $200 up front and they don't see it for another like 6 weeks. Well, that's a huge problem. So that has a pricing implication. If I can talk to the client directly, I can have that discussion. But if I'm going through a marketing agency, it's very difficult to have that discussion. You have to have it because otherwise you can't get shoppers and you can't get repeat shoppers. So again, prepare a short pack as to what your assumptions are. Nothing too complicated that the agency will get confused with when they present to the client. Finally, on pricing, who pays when it's not your fault? So who pays when the store is under repair and the shopper couldn't do it? Who pays when they go in to do a sales mystery shop as a walk-in and the salesperson's just away all day? The shopper's got to be paid. How are you going to deal with that? Are you going to charge them half the shop fee and then redo the shop? Are you going to just simply not include that as a non-result? What are you going to do? If you're going to do it as a half a shop fee and promise them that you'll redo it again, what happens if it's at the end of the month and this was the last shop? So you've got all these complications here that you need to deal with and be very explicit about with the client. Upfront costs, be explicit about those. Perhaps what we do is we say the upfront cost for this is $1,500 and we've waived it because you're going into a monthly program, excuse me. Again, presentation costs, be clear. Changes to scope, be brave and leave it open. We tend, in mystery shopping companies, tend not to like to talk about scope creep. But if you've ever used a builder to build your house or used any other consultants, anything outside of scope costs money. And it's a world that we have to get used to doing because it's killing us in our profitability and I'm sure it's hurting you as well. Payment terms, what are your payment terms? If you don't say what your payment terms, then you'll find that you might get stuck with something like 60 days or 90 days, which is their standard. So you need to put that up front. We say 2 weeks and sometimes they say, oh, 2 weeks is crazy. We can't do 2 weeks. Our normal is 2 months. And then we have a discussion about payment terms. We also like to send them an immediate invoice. Even if it's just for $100 or for the setup fee or whatever, it just unblocks the payment process because when you're a new provider, a new supplier, you can find that your invoice will take 2 or 3 months because you're not registered, certain things have to be done, you need a purchase order number and all this ridiculous stuff, which kills you when you've already paid the shoppers. So try to send an immediate invoice out to them for whatever reason you can. Now also here, price variable for quantity. This is really important. So the client says to you, hey, we're going to do monthly shops or we're going to do quarterly shops and you price them at quarterly. So let's say that quarter or monthly shops are $50 each and twice a year shops are $70 each. They will tell you they're doing monthly and they really do mean to do monthly and you start pricing them at $50 and then you find at the end of the year they only did 2 rounds and you price them as if they were doing monthly, but they were really doing 6 monthly. Change your pricing model so that you say to them round 1 and 2 will be at $75, even $80. Rounds 3, 4 and 5 onwards will be at $50. Then for the next 12-month period. Then if they only do 2 rounds, you've gotten a higher price per shop. And if they go on further and further into the year, you're going to price them at the monthly rate and do it in a way that it's going to even out to be about the same. It's the best way to protect yourself against clients who intentionally or unintentionally reduce the scope volume. I'm dealing with cut price. I had a chairman of a company I used to work with. He said to me one day, he said, Stephen, your most dangerous competition is the one that's going broke and doesn't know it. so true with mystery shopping companies as well. And it just happened recently in Australia. So we've lost work to this company, and the people that they worked with now will not go back to mystery shopping because everyone else is charging a more market rate. So tough to deal with. So we differentiate, and I think we all can differentiate through the questions. Hey, we're going to ask you all these questions, which just shows that you know what you're talking about. It gives them confidence. It's okay for you to say, hey, we're a high quality provider, but you can't show that. But perhaps you can show that through your presentations. Now, again, you may not decide to price all these things, but your expertise will shine through. So even if you say to them, here are these 15 or 20 or 50 or 70 things we need to talk about, you may decide that this doesn't impact on the price, but you've had the discussion with them up front. It might help you down the track, and it shows that you know what you're talking about. The variables. So we've discussed about 70 plus variables now, and we've not even looked at shopper payments. We haven't discussed how much does the shopper like it, how much should the shopper get paid. We haven't looked at staffing costs. We haven't looked at any of that stuff. There are over 70 variables on top of the normal business sort of stuff. That's how complicated pricing in mystery shopping is. So you can decide to price them all or not to price them in there, whatever, but it's important for you to consider them. So going back to the quoting world, again, you can have the detailed, no rush, the detailed rushed, the summarized, the very, very brief things that don't seem to have any rush at all, or the ones that are probably the most dangerous, these summarized ones, which are very rushed. So we've gone through them all. I don't know if any of you, there's a whole lot of you on here. I haven't had any questions yet, so I'm just going to leave this thing open for another couple of minutes as I wrap up. You will be getting an email in the next day, which will have just a little bit of follow-up stuff, but not too much. There is a newsletter that I put out, as well as the Mystery Shop MSPA puts out. Just talks about this stuff from a customer service perspective. And I'm just talking now to give you an opportunity to ask questions if you want to. So I might just leave it open for a few minutes, and then again, this is being recorded. It's been recorded. So you'll be able to grab this, share it with your staff or whatever. Yeah, I hope this has been of any use. It doesn't look like there's going to be any questions. I'll just give it another minute. Otherwise, we will be done. And I hope you enjoyed the webinar. Thank you to Anur for setting it up. And I think we're going to do a few more of these, part of the MSPA's sharing of information for members. And I hope you all get to Dubai as well and get to meet some of you in Dubai. You can tell me what you really think of the webinar when we meet in Dubai. Thanks again, Anur, for setting this up. And thanks to the MSPA for providing the platform. It's really important for our members. And although I'm not on the board again, it's great to see what you're doing with it. I just do have one or two messages. I think we're all done. So thank you, everyone. And we'll talk again. We'll do this again.